This is Northwest Reports. I'm Maliha Sayed. You're listening to the third and final episode of It's Not Easy Going Green, a series where we're exploring the sacrifices that communities in Washington are being asked to make in order to fend off an intensifying climate crisis. If you haven't listened to the first two episodes, check those out first. So far, we've heard from the community members pushing back on plans to build a wind project near the Tri-Cities, and we've taken a closer look at the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, or EFSEC, a state body that can override local bans on clean energy projects. In this episode, we're going to hear how some farmers in the state feel about these efforts to fight climate change. Some fear they threaten their way of life. Others see a promising economic opportunity. Brandon Block, the Cascade PBS investigative journalist who's been reporting on this story, actually met up with some farmers who are leasing part of their land to a solar developer. We'll also hear from a conflict reduction mapper who's envisioning the ways that these clean energy projects, and the communities where these projects are proposed, can coexist. So Brandon, in the first episode, we talked about how Benton County and other counties in central Washington are trying to stop wind and solar energy projects. Can you remind me, what was their rationale for doing that?
Benton County argued that they were protecting what they call prime farmland. They said that renewable energy was a threat to the region's agricultural economy and really agricultural identity.
Yeah, is this a common argument that these counties are making?
Yeah, it's extremely common.
And you recently went out to central Washington and interviewed some farmers. Where did you go and who did you talk to?
I did. I went to speak with David and Robin Robert. They are brothers who are fifth-generation farmers. They have a ranch about 12 miles north of Sunnyside in an area that's kind of sandwiched by hills. They are kind of on the outskirts of the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, in between Yakima and the Tri-Cities.
You can see the cattle. They're over there right now. A bunch of black spots.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see them okay?
Yeah. The Robert brothers co-own this ranch with their three other siblings. It's been in their family for over 100 years. And they're super into renewable energy. They are leasing about half of their ranch to a Canadian solar developer who plans to build what would be the state's largest solar farm. So they see this as a huge economic opportunity. Right now, they're growing a few things, some wheat, some hay, a little bit of alfalfa. They have cattle. They used to have sheep, which Robin brought up at least 3 different times in our interview. He really seems to miss the sheep.
We had sheep up until 1988, and we used to run about 2,500 head of sheep, 2 bands. I guess back, over 100 years ago, there was I was told 500,000 sheep in the state of Washington. Yeah.
But they don't do as much farming as they have in the past. If the solar farm gets built, they will have to cut back their farming a little bit. They still plan to grow some hay, and the cattle will still be able to graze. But honestly, they're already cutting back significantly. They can barely grow anything on the land as it is.
Why is that?
The biggest reason is they're running out of water. Their wells have been in decline for decades now. They're also getting older, and farming is tough work. None of their kids want to take over. They see this as an opportunity to provide a stable income that farming really does not provide in their experience, and it will allow them to keep the ranch in the family instead of selling it off, which other family members of theirs have had to sell parts of their land after going into debt. So this is a way to keep it in the family and provide a stable and sustainable income for them.
Yeah, we got Plan A. Then we're thinking of Plan B, but Plan B is not looking, if the water keeps dropping, I don't know. I don't know if we're going to be able to ever get any of our kids to come out here, And we can't expect Rob and my brother Gene to keep going, So I don't know. I guess we just...
So Benton County, like we said, is trying to stop this solar development. What do the Roberts think of that?
The Roberts are perplexed by Benton County's opposition. This is not prime farmland at all.
In 20 or 30 years, if the water level keeps going down, we may not even have irrigation, And their biggest thing is that they don't want to see any, prime farmland taken out, the county commissioners. But but this isn't really prime farmland anymore.
They're barely able to irrigate the land to grow anything. They're mostly running cattle these days, and the cattle will continue to graze after the solar panels go in.
So the Roberts obviously support this clean energy project, but are there farmers who are opposing similar projects in Washington?
Yeah, there's quite a few. One of the most interesting to me is this battle going on up in Skagit County, where they're trying to put in a battery energy storage facility just outside of Cedro-Woolley. And there are a number of farmers up there who have actually created a new activist group to oppose this project. And it's interesting because unlike Benton or Yakima County, this is a pretty liberal area where most people are saying that they're very concerned about climate change. I actually watched a public hearing a couple months back where pretty much every person who testified was against the battery energy storage facility.
Climate, yes, we do have climate issues. Without our land, we don't have our food. Now, I understand that there is pressure for energy storage units, but perhaps maybe agriculture land in Skagit is not the best place for it.
And the county government there, in response, passed their own moratorium. People were pretty fired up at this public hearing.
So the first time I spoke in front of EFSA, my little baby was about 3 months old, and we were stopping the nuclear power plant. Here we go again with these guys. I mean, we got to stop this.
So a lot of the people that testified at this hearing, they said the farmers here were growing food. Obviously, Skagit Valley is famous for its tulips, but there's also lots of organic farms there that are growing different types of food. And a lot of the people at the public hearing were saying, look, if we don't have food, we've got nothing. Their perspective was that one of the most important things that you can do to fight climate change is to have these local organic farms.
We must both have alternative energy solutions while also keeping and maintaining natural lands to act as a carbon sink to clean our environment from carbon. One doesn't work without the other. From a social economic standpoint, food insecurity is real. And if we don't have farmland, we don't have anything.
So that's in contrast to the Robert brothers, who say their land isn't viable for a local farm, but they seem to feel like they're just getting lumped into these fights.
Yeah, that really resonates actually with something that Dave Robert told me, which is that he feels like since the Horse Heaven Hills, the Benton County commissioners just see all renewables as kind of bad and bad for farmland. He kept saying that if they would just come out here, they would see that this isn't prime farmland at all, but they haven't visited.
Is there anyone who's trying to figure out ways to site these clean energy projects while respecting the wishes of local communities?
Yeah, I talked to this biologist named Jim Stritholt. He's part of a team at Washington State University that is trying to bring together different groups, like the ones we just talked about, to make a map. And this map would identify some of the most controversial areas for renewable development, but also some of the least controversial areas. And hopefully by identifying these areas and publishing this map can help developers avoid those more controversial areas.
These things are not benign. Just because you're doing renewable energy doesn't mean that your development is benign. It has other consequences, and sometimes those consequences are more direct and more urgent. And that's what this process was trying to achieve. So we can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. Why don't we do that? If we include people from the very beginning, we can minimize some of that social tension that comes with any of these kinds of things.
From Jim's perspective, what is causing major holdups and backlash with clean energy projects?
You know, one of the aspects he really zeroed in on was the fact that these sites are chosen by private companies. Companies look at site selection from an engineering and a business perspective. They're not so much thinking about how to avoid sensitive animal habitat or prime farmland or sacred tribal sites. And when they do inevitably end up trying to build in those areas, then the government has to come in and referee those inevitable conflicts.
Yeah, well, but I think what happens is we have a false choice here. You know, it's like one or the other. Well, Why can't it be both? Why can't you protect the bird habitat and have the solar stuff at the same time? It is possible if we're smart about it. From a developer perspective in general in our culture, it's economics comes first, oftentimes. Again, there's nothing wrong with creating jobs and making money. What I think we need to do as a culture is we need to do that in a way that causes the least amount of damage to other people and still meets the needs, right? That's what we have to do.
He actually ran some of the currently proposed wind and solar projects through this map, this crowdsourced map that they made, to see how they scored.
Some did okay. Some were in terrible places, which is what you would expect because it's random, right?
What does he recommend developers do instead, and how do they juggle the desires of so many different community members and stakeholders, especially when they're often conflicting?
Yeah, so he's done similar mapping work for California and other states. And the idea is that it's not necessarily a final product or a binding solution or anything, but it's a starting point, a cheat sheet, if you will, for developers. Here's the areas that you should probably avoid. It also tells you here are some areas that might be less likely to provoke pushback. So these might be good sites, actually. And this is kind of just the beginning of the work. There's an even more ambitious idea out there that would expand on this kind of consensus building work and actually make it official. So this was a proposal, actually. This was discussed in the report that we talked about last episode, the report that was criticizing FSEC. The idea would be to create a government agency that would identify suitable solar lands that are also low conflict and steer developers there. The agency would even potentially acquire the land, get permits for it, basically hand it off to the developers, what they call build ready. So here you go, developer, take the land and you can start building immediately. Several states have already taken steps in this direction. New Mexico, Wyoming, and Colorado have all set up state agencies that are pursuing some of these goals.
Do you see this taking off in Washington?
Yeah, there's already a proposal to create a study to look into the feasibility of creating an agency like this. So Democrats seem on board with it. FSEC is on board with it. They didn't have any issue with this. This was one of the few suggestions in the report that they did not take any issue with. They specifically highlighted that they think it's a good idea. So yeah, I think it's entirely possible.
So you have spent months reporting on these clean energy projects and talking to a lot of people who have some stake in them. What sticks out to you and what stays with you throughout this reporting?
It's tempting to, and I think intuitive on some level, to think that conserving things and stopping things from being built is the right way of doing environmentalism, or that environmentalism should be about protecting natural lands and trying to keep things as unindustrialized as possible. But I mean, the reality of climate change is that we are going to need to build a lot of stuff if we're going to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and if we're going to stop using the fossil fuels that we're currently using. So I think that's something that's really hard for people to wrap their minds around. I don't know. The other thing I was thinking about was like, America is so far behind other countries in transitioning to renewable energy. I mean, the world leader in solar is China, and they do it because they don't have the same kinds of checks and balances on development that we do. They just steamroll right ahead and build stuff. And I think there are a lot of aspects of the Chinese state that people would not wish to emulate in this country. But I think it's worth considering why we're so far behind on the energy transition. I think part of the reason we're in this mess is because the way that we pursued energy in the past, specifically in Washington with our system of dams that were both the reason that we have one of the greenest grids in the country and also the reason that the salmon are dying off. The way that we pursued those projects and just kind of steamrolled over the objections of indigenous tribes has put us in a place where there's just zero trust in the state. And when the state wants to build an energy project, immediately the thought goes back to, it's going to be like the dams again. And so there's not a lot of goodwill to be had amongst tribal nations. Something that has not come up at all in any of this reporting is that the U.S. historically is the biggest contributor to global warming emissions of any country in the world. Right now, other countries are emitting more than we are, but historically, the U.S. has emitted the most tons of CO2 of any country in the world. Objectively, scientifically, we have produced the biggest part of the problem. But the conversations that people are having over these renewable energy facilities about what sacrifices and trade-offs we're willing to make, we're not hearing from people in Bangladesh who are dying in floods that are made worse by the greenhouse gases that we have released into the atmosphere. So we get to decide what sacrifices we're willing to live with, but people in other countries who are more directly affected by the choices that we've already made, they're the ones who are living with the sacrifices that they're being forced to make, that they don't have a choice to make or not. You know, there's people in the Tri-Cities who are angry at the governor for forcing these sacrifices on them. But I think those kind of pale in comparison to the sacrifices that we're forcing on the rest of the world by not addressing this problem. And on ourselves, really. It's not just other people, it's all of us.
Thanks for listening to It's Not Easy Going Green by Northwest Reports. This was the third and final episode in this series, but stay tuned for another series on a different topic releasing in June. This episode was reported by Brandon Block. It was produced by me, Maliha Sayed, and Sarah Bernard. The story editor was Ryan Famuliner. Our executive producer is Sarah Menzies. You can subscribe to Northwest Reports wherever you listen. And whatever platform you're listening on, please review us. We'd love to know what you think of the show. Northwest Reports is made possible by listeners like you. Your support will tell the stories that shape Washington State. Join the members who help us create Northwest Reports. Your donation will be put to work right away, delivering the Cascade PBS lineup of podcasts, video docuseries, and daily in-depth reporting you and so many rely on. In addition to supporting our journalism, members receive great member benefits, including Cascade PBS Passport with extended access to an on-demand library of local and PBS favorites. Go to cascadepbs.org/NW reports to sign up today. For the latest political, environmental, and culture news from the Pacific Northwest, visit cascadepbs.org. That's also where you'll find It's Not Easy Going Green. Northwest Reports is a product of Cascade PBS. I'm Maliha Sayed. We'll be back soon with another episode.